The snow had stopped falling over Pine Valley, but the silence it left behind carried the weight of secrets too heavy for one town to hold. What began as a desperate knock on a lonely cabin door had turned into something far greater, a storm of truth, corruption, and faith. 10 nights ago, Officer Ryan Callahan found 2 children alone in the snow, their parents missing somewhere in the mountains. That same night, his canine partner Shadow followed a trail that would uncover the unimaginable, the Carter family, bound and left for dead, victims of a powerful web of deceit reaching into the heart of the town itself. Since then, the quiet sheriff had become the protector of a family hunted by men in power. Together, they unearthed a hidden drive that could destroy the corrupt deputy mayor, Leonard Briggs, and expose the truth behind the company called North Star Construction. But their discovery came at a price. Betrayal within the police force, the disappearance of Officer Jack Harmon, and a bullet warning fired into Ryan's door. Now, the line between friend and foe grows thin. The town whispers lies. The law turns its back. Yet, in the heart of Ryan's cabin, one bond still burns: the faith between man, family, and dog. As the snow melts and spring nears, darkness moves again in the shadows of Pine Valley. But this time, Ryan, Shadow, and the Carter family are no longer the hunted. They are the light that refuses to be extinguished. And what comes next will decide whether truth survives or dies buried beneath the silence of a small mountain town. Ryan Callahan drove through the back roads of Pine Valley with his headlights off, the forest swallowing the sound of his tires. The suspension creaked as he pulled over by the old sawmill, long abandoned, now nothing more than a skeleton of rotting beams and rusted equipment. The cold mist hung thick, wrapping everything in a pale, lifeless haze. Though officially suspended from duty, Ryan wore his Navy field jacket and tactical vest beneath a civilian coat. He wasn't ready to act like a man off the force. The badge was still clipped inside his pocket, a silent reminder of who he was. Beside him, Shadow sat upright in the passenger seat, his black and tan coat catching faint light from the dashboard. The dog's amber eyes glowed, alert and waiting. In the rear seat, Thomas Carter, mid-40s, lean with salt and pepper hair and the sharp eyes of a journalist who'd spent years reading Danger, loaded a small voice recorder. He wore a thick gray sweater under a battered brown jacket that still carried ash from the burned SUV. "You sure about this?" Thomas asked. His voice was low, steady, but it carried fatigue, the kind that comes after days of fear and sleeplessness. Ryan glanced at him. "No, but we can't ignore it." Thomas held the folded note again. "If you want to know who betrayed you, come to North Star's old construction yard tomorrow night." There was no signature, only a smudge of oil and a faint smell of gasoline. "I thought about telling Grace," Thomas said quietly, "but she's been through enough." Ryan nodded. "She'd tell you not to go, which is exactly why you need someone watching your back." Shadow shifted, sniffing the air. His tail gave a single low sweep before going still. The clock on the dash struck 11:47 p.m. Ryan turned off the ignition. "We go on foot from here." They stepped into the cold, the ground crunching under their boots. Ryan scanned the tree line with his flashlight off, trusting his night vision. The air smelled of rust and wet pine. The remnants of the North Star site loomed ahead, a half-finished concrete foundation surrounded by skeletal cranes, their arms frozen mid-swing like metallic ghosts. Thomas muttered, "Can't believe this was supposed to be the bridge project. Millions gone, and people still calling it progress." Ryan's jaw tightened. Progress for the ones taking the money. As they approached, Shadow froze. His body stiffened, head lowering, ears pricked forward. Ryan raised a hand, signaling Thomas to stop. A faint sound echoed through the dark, 2 male voices, hushed, arguing behind the largest crane. Ryan crouched low, motioning for Thomas to stay put. He crept forward, hand brushing the cold grip of his sidearm. The voices grew clearer. "The files were supposed to be destroyed." "Relax. The mayor's office doesn't know it's still backed up on the server. You think Briggs is going to let this slide? Ryan's stomach turned at the second voice. It was one he knew well. Jack Harmon, late 30s, square build, sandy blonde hair. A fellow deputy, his partner in more than a dozen cases, now standing in the dark trading secrets with the very people Ryan had been chasing. Ryan whispered into the small mic pinned inside his jacket, "Thomas, it's Jack. He's in on it." Before Thomas could answer, a metallic click sliced through the night. Shadow growled low. Ryan didn't hesitate. He shoved the dog aside, just as a shot cracked from the darkness. The bullet slammed into a metal beam inches from his head, showering sparks. "Sniper!" Ryan hissed, grabbing Thomas by the arm. They dove behind a half-collapsed wall, the air filled with the smell of gunpowder. Shadow bolted toward the far side, zigzagging through debris. Ryan knew that movement well. The dog was tracking the shooter's scent. "Shadow, heel!" he called, but the dog ignored him, circling wide through the yard. Ryan peeked over the wall just long enough to catch a glimpse of Jack's figure retreating toward a black SUV parked near the edge of the lot. Thomas clutched his recorder to his chest. "You saw that, right? He fired first." "Yeah," Ryan said through gritted teeth. "That's all the confirmation we need." Shadow barked sharply from the left flank. Ryan turned just in time to see a second figure, tall, wearing a dark coat, raising another rifle. Before the man could aim, Shadow lunged, slamming into his legs. The gun discharged harmlessly into the sky. Ryan sprinted forward, grabbed Thomas's arm, and shouted, "Run!" They dashed for the truck, snow and gravel scattering beneath their boots. Shadow followed, muzzle dusted with dirt, tail low but steady. A second gunshot rang out. The bullet shattered Ryan's side mirror as he started the engine. The headlights flared to life, cutting through the fog. In the glare, Jack Harmon's face appeared briefly, expression cold, unmoved, watching them escape. Thomas slumped in the passenger seat, gasping. "Jack. He used to have dinner with my kids." Ryan's hands tightened around the steering wheel. "He's working for Briggs now. That means the deputy mayor's got eyes inside every department." "Then we can't trust anyone," Thomas muttered. Ryan glanced at Shadow in the rearview mirror. The dog's fur was bristled, chest rising fast, still keyed up from the fight. "We'll trust him," Ryan said quietly, "and that'll have to be enough." They drove in silence for several miles. Only the hum of the tires filled the air. When they reached the main road, Ryan turned off his lights again and pulled over. "We can't go home yet. If they tracked you once, they'll do it again." Thomas nodded. "Grace will be worried." "She's smart," Ryan replied. "Smarter than any of us. She'll keep the kids safe." But at that very moment, back in Ryan's cabin, Grace was far from safe. She had stayed awake, restless, unable to shake the unease that lingered since Ryan left. The clock read 12:30 a.m. The storm outside had faded, leaving an eerie quiet. She rose from the couch, pulling her cardigan tighter around her shoulders, and checked on the children. Noah and Ellie were asleep, huddled under the same blanket near the fire. As Grace adjusted the edge of the quilt, her hand brushed against Ellie's stuffed bear and felt something hard beneath the fabric. Frowning, she turned it over. A small black device was stitched into the toy's seam. A red light blinked faintly, hidden under fur. Her breath caught. "Oh, God!" She grabbed a pair of scissors from the kitchen drawer, sliced open the seam, and pulled out a tiny micro-camera, no bigger than her thumb. Wires and a transmitter glimmered inside. Grace's mind raced. Someone had planted it inside her daughter's toy. That meant they had been watched for days, maybe weeks. Shadow wasn't here to warn her this time, but she remembered Ryan's words. If anything feels wrong, trust your instincts. She stuffed the bear and camera into a metal pot, dumped salt over it, and set it in the fireplace. The plastic warped, releasing a faint, acrid smoke. When Noah stirred, she forced a smile. "Go back to sleep, honey. Everything's fine." But as she looked toward the dark window, Grace knew fine was a lie. The real danger had already found its way inside their home. Meanwhile, miles away, Ryan slowed the truck near an overlook where the mountain road curved sharply. Below them, the valley glowed faintly with the lights of Pine Valley. Thomas rubbed his temples. He's been right beside us the whole time. Jack knew every move we made. Ryan nodded grimly. And now we know who's feeding Briggs the intel. He turned to look at Thomas, determination burning in his gray eyes. Tomorrow, we go public, with everything. Shadow gave a low bark, as if in agreement. Ryan started the engine again, the truck rolling forward into the dark highway. Behind them, far off in the trees, another pair of headlights flickered. Brief, silent, following. Ryan parked 2 blocks away from the precinct where the faint orange glow of the streetlights failed to reach the shadowed back alley. The building loomed ahead, dark, silent, and locked since the investigation into Jack Harmon's temporary leave began. Pine Valley's police headquarters looked hollow at night, like a shell of something that once represented order but now hid corruption behind its walls. Ryan wore a plain black jacket over a dark flannel shirt, jeans, and boots, the attire of a man who wanted to blend into the dark rather than stand out as a cop. Shadow walked beside him, tail low, steps silent. The dog had worked enough night raids to understand the tension in Ryan's body. They moved through the back entrance, using a bypass code Ryan still remembered from his active days. The lock clicked softly. Inside, the building smelled of dust and old coffee. His flashlight cut a thin line of light down the hallway as he made his way to the second floor, Jack Harmon's office. The small room was a mess. A desk overturned, file cabinets half open, papers scattered across the floor. Dust had already begun to settle over everything. Ryan crouched, scanning the floor with the flashlight. He noticed the faint marks of boot soles. Fresh, not older than a day. Someone had been here recently. Shadow sniffed the air, head tilted, then moved toward the far corner. The dog's nose brushed against a wooden panel behind a bookshelf. Ryan frowned. He pushed the shelf aside with a grunt, revealing a narrow door flush with the wall, secured by a simple lock. "Good boy," Ryan whispered. He pulled a small tool from his pocket and picked the lock in seconds. The panel swung open, revealing a small hidden compartment. Inside sat an external hard drive, dustless, its indicator light faintly blinking red. Next to it were several folders stamped Internal Affairs Confidential. Ryan's pulse quickened. He connected the hard drive to his laptop. The screen filled with files, hundreds of them. Transaction records, encrypted communications, audio logs. One folder stood out. Briggs/Fund Transfers, JH. He clicked it open. Screenshots appeared, detailing payments from a dummy construction account to one registered under Jack Harmon's name. Bribes. Dozens of them. "Jack, what the hell were you doing?" Ryan muttered. He kept digging, finding another folder titled Erased Logs. These were deleted surveillance archives from the North Star Construction database, the same files that had gone missing after the FBI raid. Jack hadn't just taken bribes, he'd actively wiped evidence to protect Briggs and his partners. Behind him, Shadow gave a soft growl. The sound was low, questioning. Ryan turned. The dog stood near a metal cabinet, paw resting against the door. Ryan opened it, expecting more files, but instead found a faint scent of oil and pine. Inside was a rolled-up paper tube. He unfurled it under the light. It was a map. The map showed Pine Creek Lake and the surrounding woods, marked with a red X at the far end of the shoreline. An old warehouse property long abandoned since the timber mill closed, written in small print on the corner. Delivery point. Jan 20, 10 p.m. "Looks like Briggs's people have a drop site," Ryan murmured. He folded the map carefully and slid it into his jacket. He copied all the hard drive data onto a secure thumb drive, then encrypted the files using Thomas Carter's custom cipher, an algorithm the journalist had created to protect whistleblower evidence. Ryan labeled it Carter Lock 1 and slipped it into his vest pocket. He shut down the laptop and was just about to leave when Shadow stiffened again, staring at the frosted glass window of the office door. A faint beam of light swept across it from the hallway. Someone was outside. Ryan killed his flashlight instantly and drew his weapon. Footsteps echoed down the hall, measured, deliberate. The metallic click of a flashlight turning off. Silence followed. Ryan waited, heart pounding, then slowly backed toward the secondary exit that led to the stairwell. The doorknob creaked. He slipped out before the light returned and made his way down the stairwell in darkness. Shadow followed silently, every muscle tight. They reached the ground floor and moved out through the side entrance, disappearing into the night. A shadowy figure entered the hallway seconds later and stopped in front of Jack's office. The faint beam of a flashlight traced over the open cabinet and the missing map. A gloved hand clenched into a fist. By the time Ryan reached his truck, a drizzle had begun. The wipers squeaked softly as he pulled into an empty side street. He plugged the thumb drive into a secure cloud backup using a portable modem and sent a message to Thomas. "Got it. Meet tomorrow morning. Encrypt full. Delete after." Thomas responded almost immediately. "Understood. Be careful. They're watching." Ryan leaned back in his seat, exhausted but focused. Shadow rested his head on Ryan's knee, the warmth grounding him. "We're close, buddy," Ryan said quietly. "Too close for comfort." As they turned down the dirt road leading back toward his cabin, Shadow suddenly lifted his head, ears pricked. Ryan glanced at the rearview mirror. Headlights flashed once behind them, then vanished. He slowed. Nothing, just the hum of wind through the trees. He drove another mile, parked, and shut off the lights. Through the faint moonlight, he scanned the road behind. A faint shape, an SUV, sat idling far back in the trees. When Ryan's gaze fixed on it, the vehicle's headlights flickered off, swallowed by darkness. "They know," Ryan muttered. He started the engine again, turned off toward an unmarked trail leading behind the ridge, and took the long route home. By the time he arrived, the cabin lights were still on. Grace met him at the door, robe tied hastily, her face pale. "Ryan," she whispered, "you need to see this." He followed her inside. On the table lay the remains of the burnt camera she'd found the night before, melted plastic twisted around black metal. "It wasn't just a camera," she said. "Thomas checked it earlier. It had a transmitter. They were watching us live." Ryan's jaw tightened. "Then they know every step we've taken." Grace's voice trembled. "What if they come back?" "They already did," Ryan said quietly, "but now we know where they're going next." Behind them, Noah appeared on the stairs holding a small notebook. "I couldn't sleep," he said softly. "So I wrote about today, about you and Shadow." Ryan tried to smile. "Yeah? What did you write, partner?" Noah held up the notebook shyly. "It's called The Policeman Who Never Gave Up. It's about how sometimes you have to be brave even when the whole town says you're wrong." Ryan looked at him for a long moment, then rested a hand on his shoulder. "That's a good story, Noah. Maybe someday the town will learn what brave really means." Upstairs, Grace tucked Ellie back into bed. Downstairs, Ryan sat near the fire, the encrypted drive glinting faintly in his hand. Outside, through the frosted window, a pair of headlights flickered again, brief, distant, waiting. The storm had ended, but the hunt had only just begun. The morning broke with a pale, thin light creeping through the gray clouds, but inside Ryan's cabin, the tension was heavy enough to crush the air. Ryan sat at the kitchen table with Thomas, a steaming mug of untouched coffee beside him, and a spread of documents on the wood, maps of Pine Creek, financial ledgers, and the encrypted data he'd pulled from Jack's hard drive. Both men looked like they hadn't slept in days. Ryan, still in his black flannel and worn jeans, traced the outline of the map leading to the warehouse near the lake. "This spot, right here," he said, tapping the X. "Briggs's money laundering operation probably runs out of there. If we can connect it to the missing funds and the North Star contracts, the FBI won't be able to ignore it." Thomas rubbed his temples, eyes shadowed with exhaustion. "We'll need photographic proof, names, dates. It can't just be numbers." Ryan nodded. "I'll go tonight. You stay with your family until then." Shadow, lying at Ryan's boots, lifted his head and gave a small, uneasy growl. His amber eyes flicked toward the front window, as if sensing something beyond sight. Ryan looked up, frowning. "Easy, boy. Probably a deer. Outside, the trees swayed, and the faint sound of an engine drifted through the distance before vanishing. Ryan stood, grabbed his coat, and turned to Thomas. "Lock the doors. Don't open for anyone but me." He left moments later, driving toward town to meet an informant who claimed to have seen Jack near the Pine Creek docks. Back at the cabin, Grace tried to keep the children calm. She moved through the small kitchen, humming softly while making breakfast. Pancakes for Ellie, oatmeal for Noah. The scent of butter and coffee filled the air, but her hands trembled slightly as she poured syrup. The house felt too quiet without Ryan's steady presence. Noah, now wearing one of Ryan's old sheriff caps that hung loosely over his ears, wrote something in his journal. "Mom," he said, "when this is over, can I give my book to Officer Ryan? I want him to know we're not scared." Grace smiled weakly. "That's a wonderful idea, sweetheart." Outside, the sound of tires crunching on gravel interrupted her answer. Grace glanced through the window. A black delivery van stopped near the gate, no markings, engine idling. Her gut clenched. "Stay here," she whispered, her voice low. Shadow, still lying near the fire, suddenly rose, hackles raised, a deep growl vibrating through the cabin. Grace's heart began to pound. Before she could react, the door burst open. Two men in dark coats and ski masks stormed inside, their movements sharp and practiced. One was tall and broad-shouldered, his eyes cold through the slit of the mask. The other was leaner, wiry, with quick hands. "Don't scream," the tall one barked, grabbing Grace by the arm and shoving her toward the wall. "We're not here for you." Ellie screamed, clutching her stuffed bear, and Noah jumped in front of her. "Leave her alone!" he cried. The wiry man lunged forward, grabbing both children roughly. Shadow leapt with a snarl, teeth flashing, hitting the man's arm hard enough to make him curse. The dog's claws scraped across the floorboards, leaving deep marks as he tried to pull the man down. "Shoot him!" the tall man shouted, but the wiry one didn't. He slammed the butt of his pistol against Shadow's side instead, forcing the dog to stumble back. Grace screamed and tried to rush forward, but the tall man shoved her down. "You want your kids alive?" he hissed. "Then tell your hero to hand over the evidence." Noah fought to hold on to Ellie, tears streaming down his face. "Don't hurt her, please." Shadow, dazed but not defeated, lunged again, snapping at the sleeve of the man's coat. He tore a piece of fabric away, leaving claw marks and streaks of blood across the hardwood floor. The men dragged the children toward the van, one of them shouting into a radio. "Package secured! Moving now!" The door slammed, and the vehicle roared down the dirt road, snow scattering in its wake. Grace crawled to the window, trembling hands gripping the sill as she screamed their names into the cold air. But the van was gone. Shadow limped to her side, muzzle flecked with foam, growling low at the fading sound of the engine. Grace pulled him close, sobbing into his fur. "They took them. They took my babies." When Ryan returned an hour later, the cabin door was wide open, the morning wind pushing it back and forth with a mournful creak. Papers were scattered, the table overturned. "Grace!" he shouted, sprinting inside. He found her sitting on the floor beside the fireplace, face pale, eyes empty. Shadow lay beside her, chest heaving, one paw bloodied. When she looked up, her lips trembled. "They took them," she whispered hoarsely. "Two men. Masks. They said if you don't give them the evidence, the children won't survive." Ryan knelt in front of her, gripping her shoulders. "Which way did they go?" She pointed toward the main road, tears streaking down her cheeks. "They had a black van, no plates." Ryan's throat tightened. "I'll find them." Grace's hand clutched his sleeve. "They said your name, Ryan. They knew you'd come for them." Ryan froze. The realization struck him hard. The kidnappers weren't random mercenaries. They were connected to Briggs. This was a message. Thomas burst through the door moments later, his expression wild. "I heard the radio chatter. 2 unidentified men headed north before they switched frequencies." He looked at Grace, then at Ryan. "They took the kids?" Ryan stood, voice like steel. "Yes, and they'll use them to force my hand." Shadow whined softly, struggling to his feet. He limped toward the door, nose pressed against the broken wood. Ryan followed. His gaze. "He's got the scent." "Ryan," Grace said desperately, "you can't go alone. I'm not waiting for permission anymore." At that exact moment, the sound of another car engine approached. A dark SUV rolled to a stop outside. A man in a clean gray uniform stepped out. Sheriff Dean Holbrook, the newly appointed chief after Ryan's suspension. He was in his mid-50s, tall, slightly overweight, with slicked-back silver hair and an expensive overcoat that didn't belong in rural law enforcement. His reputation had arrived before him, a bureaucrat loyal to Deputy Mayor Briggs. Holbrook entered the cabin, eyes scanning the chaos without emotion. "Officer Callahan," he said in a measured tone, "you are not authorized to conduct any investigation. I'll be taking over from here." Ryan glared at him. "They took 2 children, Sheriff. This isn't the time for politics." Holbrook smirked slightly. "You're suspended. Remember? You start meddling again, I'll have you in cuffs." Grace stepped forward. "He's the only one who can find them." Holbrook ignored her. "If the kidnappers contact you, hand everything to me. That includes the evidence." Ryan's jaw clenched. "You mean the evidence that implicates your friend Briggs?" Holbrook's eyes hardened, but he forced a tight smile. "Watch your words, Callahan. You're on thin ice." Ryan took a step closer, his voice low. "If anything happens to those kids, Sheriff, I won't wait for permission to act." Holbrook turned sharply and left, his polished boots crunching on gravel as he got back into his SUV. The sound of the engine faded, leaving only silence and the faint crackle of the dying fire. Ryan stood in the doorway, watching the road disappear into the forest. The snow had begun to fall again, slow and heavy, covering the tire marks. Shadow pressed against his leg, whimpering softly. He crouched, resting a hand on the dog's head. "We'll get them back," he whispered. "Whatever it takes." Thomas looked out at the snowy road. "They're making this personal now." Ryan's eyes narrowed, full of resolve. "Good. So am I." The storm outside grew stronger, as if echoing the fury building inside the man and his dog. The fight wasn't about evidence anymore, it was about family. The night pressed down on Pine Valley like a heavy blanket, the snow reflecting only fragments of moonlight as Ryan's truck barreled down the back roads. The windshield wipers beat in rhythm with his heartbeat, clearing away streaks of white that seemed endless. Shadow sat rigid in the passenger seat, muzzle lifted, nostrils flaring. His sharp eyes tracked something beyond the darkness, a scent, faint but undeniable. Ryan's hands gripped the steering wheel tight, his jaw locked. Every second that passed felt like a lifetime. The sound of Grace's broken voice, "They took them, Ryan," echoed over and over in his head. He'd promised her he'd bring the kids back, and there was no room for failure. Shadow let out a sharp bark and pawed at the window. Ryan slowed just enough for the dog to push his nose closer to the glass. "You got something, boy," he whispered. Shadow whined, ears erect, then gave a low growl that vibrated through the cabin. Ryan turned onto a smaller trail where the snow was deeper and the trees grew closer, their tall forms bending under the weight of frost. The truck's headlights flickered over tire tracks barely visible beneath fresh snow. Ryan leaned forward, eyes narrowing. "That's them," he muttered. "Hold on." He pressed the accelerator, the tires crunching and slipping on the uneven path. The road wound through the forest, the dark pine branches whipping past like the closing arms of the night. For the next 20 minutes they followed the tracks until the woods opened into a clearing. Ahead, at the far edge of the frozen lake, stood an old warehouse. It was the same location marked on Jack's secret map. Its roof sagged under years of neglect, but faint yellow light spilled from one of the side windows. Ryan turned off the engine and cut the lights. The only sound was the whisper of wind sweeping off Pine Creek. He reached for his radio, then hesitated. Sheriff Holbrook would never send help. If he called for backup, Briggs's men would arrive before anyone else. He checked his sidearm, chambered around, and turned to Shadow. "We go quiet," he said softly. "You take the left." The dog's ears flicked once in acknowledgement. They moved through the snow like ghosts, each step muffled. The smell of oil, wood rot, and something else, faintly metallic, hung in the air. As they neared the building, Ryan heard the unmistakable sound of crying. It was soft, trembling, echoing through the wooden walls. Ellie. His chest tightened. He crouched beneath a broken window and peered inside. The interior was dimly lit by a single hanging bulb. Ellie sat bound to a chair, tears streaking her red cheeks. Noah was beside her, his hands tied, his face pale but defiant. Two men stood near the back door, one smoking, the other pacing with a rifle slung over his shoulder. Ryan whispered, "Hang in there, kids." Then, in the shadows near the far wall, Shadow froze. His nose pressed to the ground, his body tensed, and without a sound he slipped around the side of the building. Ryan waited until he heard the faint thump of impact and a strangled yell. Shadow had struck. Inside, the man with the rifle shouted, "What the hell was that?" before he was pulled down by the blur of fur and teeth. The second man lunged for his gun, but Ryan was already inside. He kicked the door open and fired a warning shot into the ceiling. "Police!" His voice echoed. "Drop it, now!" The gunman froze, staring at the figure in the doorway. His hesitation lasted only a second before Shadow slammed into him from the side, knocking him hard into a metal crate. The gun skidded across the floor. Ryan moved fast, cutting the ropes around Noah and Ellie. "You're okay now," he said, voice steady despite his racing pulse. "Stay behind me." Ellie sobbed, clinging to his jacket. "They said they were going to hurt us if you didn't come." "I'm here," he said quietly, "and no one's touching you again." But before he could lead them out, a voice rang from the shadows. "You always had a flair for the heroic, Ryan." Ryan turned slowly. Jack Harmon stepped out from behind a stack of barrels, his pistol aimed directly at Ryan's chest. The dim light revealed his face. Unshaven, eyes hollow, expression unreadable. His once pristine uniform jacket was gone, replaced by a dark coat that looked too new, too expensive. "Jack," Ryan said evenly, keeping his gun low but ready, "you don't have to do this." "Oh, I think I do," Jack replied, his tone calm but trembling underneath. "You should have stayed out of this. Briggs promised me protection. A new start. But you—" He gestured toward Ryan with the barrel. "You had to dig, didn't you? You always had to play the hero." Ryan took a small step to the side, shielding the children. "You can still walk away. Turn yourself in, tell the truth." Jack's mouth twitched into something like a smile, but his eyes were glassy. "The truth doesn't save anyone anymore." He raised the gun. Before he could fire, a low growl filled the air. Shadow emerged from behind the crates, lips curled, teeth glinting. Jack's attention flickered for a split second, long enough for Ryan to move. He grabbed a metal pipe from the floor and swung it, knocking Jack's arm aside. The shot went wide, shattering a window. Jack staggered back. Ryan lunged, tackling him to the ground. The two men struggled, boots scraping against concrete. Jack fought with desperate strength, years of frustration spilling out in every punch. Ryan took a hit to the jaw but countered, twisting Jack's wrist until the gun clattered away. "Why, Jack?" Ryan grunted. "You had everything, a badge, a brotherhood." Jack's face twisted with rage. "And what did it get me? Scraps. Briggs offered me something real." Ryan hesitated, breathing hard, the gun now within reach. Saw it too. For a second, time froze between them, the weight of loyalty, betrayal, and justice hanging in the air. Then Ryan fired into the ceiling again, the echo thunderous in the small space. "Next one goes through your leg," he said, voice cold. "Walk away." Jack's eyes darted toward the children, toward the broken window, then back to Ryan. For the first time, fear crept into his expression. "You'll regret this," he hissed before bolting for the door. Shadow lunged, catching the edge of Jack's coat, tearing fabric as he escaped into the dark. The night swallowed him, the sound of his footsteps fading into the pines. Ryan exhaled, chest heaving. He holstered his weapon and turned to Noah and Ellie. "It's over," he said softly. Noah's voice was shaky. Are we going home now? Ryan nodded. Yeah, we're going home. He lifted Ellie into his arms, her small fingers gripping his collar tightly. Shadow limped to his side, muzzle streaked with dust and snow, but eyes still bright. Together, they walked out into the cold air. The moonlight reflected on the frozen lake, turning it silver, a mirror to the storm still brewing within him. Back in town, miles away, Thomas Carter sat alone in a diner booth. He wore a dark wool coat and a baseball cap pulled low, trying not to draw attention. Before him sat an old laptop, a cup of untouched coffee, and a trembling hand hovering over the keyboard. The waitress, a woman in her 60s with a kind face, gave him a gentle nod as she passed. Thomas typed quickly, encrypting the files from the hard drive. Then he sent them through a secure channel to a contact he trusted, a veteran journalist in Denver named Rachel Dempsey, a woman in her late 30s known for exposing political corruption. With one click, he uploaded everything. The message attached was short. If anything happens to me or my family, release it all. He leaned back, exhaling. It's out of their hands now, he murmured. Outside, the wind howled across the empty parking lot. In the distance, the faint sound of a police siren echoed, one Ryan would never hear. The flames rose like a living beast roaring through the cracked walls of the warehouse. Smoke poured into the frozen night, black against the white snow. Ryan's lungs burned as he burst through the side door, carrying Ellie in his arms and pulling Noah by the hand. The air was thick, choked with the stench of fuel and burning wood. Somewhere behind them, barrels exploded, the sound echoing across Pine Creek like thunder. "Keep running!" he shouted, voice hoarse from the smoke. Noah stumbled but held tight to his sister's arm. The children's faces were streaked with soot and tears, their cries lost in the chaos. Behind them, Shadow darted through the haze, barking urgently, eyes fixed on the building they had barely escaped. Ryan stopped only long enough to look back, and froze. Grace was still inside. He could see her through the shattered window, a dim figure near the back of the warehouse pinned beneath a fallen wooden beam. Her hands clawed at the debris, trying to free herself. "Grace!" he shouted, stepping forward, but the fire surged again, forcing him back. Before he could move, Shadow broke away from his side and charged into the inferno. "Shadow, no!" Ryan yelled, but it was too late. The German shepherd vanished into the blaze, tail disappearing behind a curtain of smoke. Inside, the heat was suffocating. Shadow's fur singed as he pushed through the collapsed beams and debris. He found Grace half buried under a pile of broken wood, coughing violently. Her face was streaked with ash, her brown hair tangled and wet with sweat. She looked up, eyes wide with disbelief when the dog appeared beside her. "Shadow," she rasped. The dog barked once, low and firm, and began tugging at her coat sleeve. When that failed, he pressed his shoulder beneath the beam, growling as he tried to lift it. Grace used the moment to crawl free, gasping for air. Flames licked the walls. Every second mattered. Outside, Ryan handed Ellie to Thomas, who had just arrived in his Jeep. The journalist's face was pale with horror. "Where's Grace?" he demanded. "She's still in there," Ryan snapped, grabbing a fire extinguisher from the vehicle. "Shadow went after her." Thomas reached for him, but Ryan was already running back into the blaze. The heat hit like a wave, and his vision blurred. He sprayed the extinguisher in bursts, carving a narrow path through the smoke. "Shadow!" he shouted. A faint bark answered. Then, through the rolling gray clouds, he saw them. Grace leaning heavily on Shadow, limping toward him. Without hesitation, Ryan rushed forward, grabbed her arm, and half-dragged, half-carried her through the flames. Shadow followed, paws blistered, fur singed, but his eyes locked on Ryan's back. They broke through the door just as the roof gave way behind them. The blast knocked them to the ground. Ryan wrapped his arms around Grace and the dog, shielding them from flying embers. The warehouse collapsed inward, sending sparks high into the night. For a moment there was only silence. Then, slowly, Grace lifted her head. Her face was streaked with soot, but she was breathing. "You," she coughed. "You came back." Ryan managed a tired grin. "You didn't think I'd let Shadow take all the credit, did you?" The dog limped toward them, panting heavily. His right paw was red and raw from burns, but he wagged his tail weakly and licked Ryan's hand. "Good boy," Ryan whispered, voice cracking. "You did it." Noah and Ellie came running from Thomas's Jeep, tears in their eyes. They threw their arms around Grace. "Mom," Noah cried, "we thought you were gone." Grace hugged them tightly, her voice trembling. "I'm here, sweetheart. I'm right here." Thomas, his face covered in ash, looked toward the burning warehouse. "It's gone," he said softly. "Every file, every clue." Ryan shook his head. "Not everything. The truth's already on its way to Denver. They can't stop it now." The journalist nodded, the weight of relief visible in his tired eyes. "Then we've already won." But as the fire continued to rage, Ryan noticed a new glow far off through the trees, orange flickers in the direction of his cabin. His stomach dropped. "No," he muttered, standing abruptly. They drove through the snow as fast as the battered Jeep could manage. When they reached the ridge overlooking the property, Ryan's heart sank. His cabin, the place that had been his refuge from the world, was engulfed in flames. The windows shattered one by one, the roof collapsing inward. Grace covered her mouth in shock. Thomas gripped the steering wheel, speechless. The children clung to their mother, wide-eyed. Ryan stepped out into the freezing night air, the snow swirling around him, glowing orange in the fire's reflection. He didn't move, didn't speak. For years, that cabin had been the only home he knew, a place of silence, isolation, and ghosts of the past. Now, as the fire devoured it, he felt something unexpected. Release. Grace walked up beside him, her voice soft but steady. "I'm sorry." He shook his head. "Don't be. That house died a long time ago. Maybe it's time I stopped living there, too." Shadow came to his side, limping slightly, and pressed his head against Ryan's leg. The smell of smoke still clung to his fur. Ryan knelt and rubbed the dog's ears gently. "You're hurt," he murmured. Shadow licked his hand, tail thumping weakly against the snow. His brown eyes shone in the firelight, tired but triumphant, as if saying, "We made it. We're still here." Grace crouched beside them, wrapping her arm around Ryan's shoulder. "You saved us all," she whispered. He smiled faintly. No, he did. They stood together in the snow, watching the flames consume what remained of the past. When the fire finally began to fade, the first light of dawn crept over. The mountains. Steam rose from the smoldering ruins, mingling with the mist drifting off Pine Creek. Thomas approached, his coat dusted with ash. "I called the fire department, but there's nothing left to save." Ryan nodded slowly. "Maybe that's the point." Behind them, Noah wrapped his arm around Ellie. "Does this mean we don't have a home anymore?" the girl asked softly. Ryan looked at her for a long moment, then said, "Home isn't a place, kiddo. It's the people standing beside you." For the first time in years, he felt the truth of his own words. The fire had taken his solitude, but in return, it had given him something far greater, a family to fight for, a reason to start over. Snowflakes began to fall again, soft and steady, blanketing the blackened earth. Shadow lay down beside Ryan, resting his head on his paw. Grace squeezed Ryan's hand gently. "We'll rebuild," she said. He nodded. "Yeah, we will." The cold morning wind carried away the last traces of smoke, leaving behind silence, ash, and the faint, unbreakable warmth of survival. The morning after the fire was colder than any before. Ash still drifted over Pine Creek, mixing with the falling snow. The air smelled of smoke and iron. Ryan stood near the wreckage, his jacket dusted with gray flakes. Grace and the children had been taken to the nearby ranger outpost for safety, while Shadow limped quietly beside him, a fresh bandage wrapped around his paw. The destruction had drawn attention, and by midday, the quiet road leading to the ruins filled with vehicles, FBI sedans and unmarked vans, their headlights cutting through the mist. A tall woman stepped out of the lead car. She was in her early 40s, wearing a dark trench coat and black gloves. Her brown hair was tied back in a tight bun, and her expression was firm, yet not unkind. "Agent Marissa Doyle, FBI." She introduced herself, showing her badge. "We've been tracking the North Star construction corruption trail for months. Looks like it's finally burned its way to the surface." Ryan nodded grimly. "You're a little late." Her gaze drifted toward the still-smoking ground. "Maybe, but I hear you kept something they wanted hidden." "More than one thing," he said, "and I'm not the only one." By afternoon, they regrouped at an old municipal building temporarily serving as the FBI field base. Grace sat wrapped in a blanket, Thomas typing furiously on his laptop beside her. Across the room, Noah was helping a woman adjust cables on a camera and laptop setup. That woman was Sarah Green, the investigative journalist who had once worked for the Denver Sentinel. She was in her mid-30s, with shoulder-length auburn hair and sharp green eyes that seemed to see through lies before they were spoken. Dressed in a gray wool coat and black turtleneck, she carried the air of someone who had been hunted before but refused to hide again. Ryan remembered her name from Thomas's notes. "Sarah Green," he said, offering a handshake. "You're the one who exposed the Harbor Point scandal 3 years ago." She smirked faintly. "And lost my job for it. The deputy mayor's legal team made sure of that." Grace looked up. "You mean Briggs?" Sarah's eyes darkened. "The same. He's been buying silence for years, but this time he's left too many trails." Thomas leaned back, rubbing his tired eyes. "We have the video, the documents, the wire transfers, everything. But if we hand it over locally, Holbrook will bury it again. The system here is compromised." Ryan folded his arms. "So, what's the plan?" Sarah opened her laptop, revealing multiple folders labeled North Star, Briggs, and Internal Comms. "We take it national. If Briggs wants to silence us, he'll have to silence half the country." Noah, who had been quietly sitting near her, looked up. "I can help with the video. The one of the car, where Jack gave him the envelope." Sarah turned, surprised. "You know how to edit?" Noah shrugged modestly. "Dad taught me. Before he and Mom left that night, he showed me how to fix sound and brightness." Thomas smiled faintly, pride and sadness mingling in his face. "Smartest kid in Pine Valley." Sarah moved aside. "All right, partner. Let's see what you've got." For the next hour, the boy worked beside her, adjusting angles, syncing audio, cutting away the static. When the screen flickered to life with the final clip, the room fell silent. On the video, Deputy Mayor Briggs sat in the backseat of a black SUV, passing an envelope stuffed with cash to Jack Harmon. His words, faint but audible: "Delete everything that connects North Star to me. And if anyone asks, there never was a bridge project." The tension in the room grew heavy. Ryan clenched his fists, Shadow growling softly near his feet. Sarah exhaled. "That's it. That's the kill shot." Thomas leaned forward. "We need redundancy. Multiple uploads, multiple locations. If Briggs's people intercept one, the others will still go live." Agent Doyle entered, holding a file. "You'll have protection, but you can't trust anyone from Pine Creek PD. I'll assign 2 federal agents to watch this building, but you stay out of sight until we finish cross-verifying your data." Ryan's jaw tightened. "Holbrook's still out there. He's not going to sit back and wait for his name to show up on a headline." Sarah nodded. "Then we'll hit publish before he has a chance to react." That night, the wind howled through the pines outside the building. Snow blew against the windows, the storm growing stronger. Inside, Shadow sat by the door, ears perked, eyes glowing faintly in the lamplight. Every creak of the old floorboards made him lift his head, alert and ready. Ryan watched him from the couch, cleaning his service pistol piece by piece. Grace and the children slept on the makeshift beds nearby, their breaths steady, safe for now. Across the room, Sarah and Thomas were still working, uploading encrypted files to cloud servers and media outlets. "Ryan?" Noah's small voice came softly through the quiet. Ryan turned. The boy stood wrapped in a blanket, hair tousled, eyes half closed from sleep. "What is it, buddy?" Noah hesitated, glancing at Shadow. "I just wanted to say, when I grow up, I want to be like you." Ryan smiled faintly, lowering the gun barrel he'd been polishing. Like me? Yeah, brave, helping people, even when it's scary. Ryan's expression softened. He set the weapon aside and motioned for Noah to sit beside him. You know what bravery really is? The boy shook his head. It's not about not being scared. It's about standing your ground even when fear's staring you in the face. Noah looked thoughtful. Like when you went into the fire? Ryan chuckled softly. Exactly like that. But I wasn't alone. Shadow was with me. The dog lifted his head at the mention of his name, thumping his tail once. Then I'll have a dog too, Noah said with sudden conviction, and we'll protect people together. Ryan looked at him for a long moment, the weight of the boy's words sinking deep. Then you'll make a fine officer someday. The moment lingered, a rare quiet in a life of storms. Outside, snow began to pile high against the doors, muffling the world into silence. But for the first time in weeks, Ryan felt something close to hope. They weren't alone anymore. The alliance had been forged not from strategy but from shared wounds and a refusal to back down. A former Marine, a broken journalist, a mother who'd survived captivity, a child with courage beyond his years, and a loyal German shepherd who never gave up. In the distance, lightning flashed over the mountains, painting the snow in a blue glow. It was a warning, perhaps, or a promise of the reckoning yet to come. Shadow's ears flicked toward the window as a low rumble echoed across the valley. Ryan looked up, eyes narrowing. "Storm's not over yet," he murmured, but this time he wasn't afraid of what was coming. The old mining site on the northern ridge looked like the skeleton of a forgotten age. Rusted cranes leaned against broken scaffolding, and the wind whistled through hollow shafts that hadn't seen daylight in decades. Snow had gathered in mounds along the gravel paths untouched by human feet, until now. Ryan's truck rolled to a stop beside an abandoned loader. He turned off the headlights, letting the darkness swallow them. The only light came from the half-moon, spilling pale silver across the ruin. "Feels wrong," Thomas muttered from the passenger seat. His breath fogged the glass as he peered out. If Jack really wanted to surrender, he'd do it at the FBI office, not here. Ryan nodded, eyes narrowed. He's scared. Or it's a setup. Either way, we find out? Shadow stood alert in the back seat, his dark fur bristling under the dim light. The burn on his paw had mostly healed, though he still favored it slightly. When Ryan opened the door, the dog jumped down soundlessly, nose lifted to the wind. Thomas adjusted his winter coat, pulling up the collar. He was exhausted. Lines had deepened around his eyes since the fire, but there was a sharpness in his gaze, the kind that came from desperation and a refusal to surrender. "Stay behind me," Ryan said quietly. He checked his sidearm, flashlight clipped to his vest. The beam sliced through the fog as they advanced into the maze of metal and shadow. A faint voice echoed from the far end of the pit. "Ryan, over here!" They froze. The voice was ragged, panicked, but familiar. Jack Harmon stepped into view, illuminated by the trembling beam of his own flashlight. He looked nothing like the confident officer Ryan once knew. His uniform jacket was gone, replaced by a torn parka, and his face was pale, gaunt, and streaked with grime. His eyes darted nervously between them and the dark ridges above. "Jack," Ryan called, keeping his tone even. "You said you wanted to talk. I'm listening." Jack swallowed hard, lowering his light. "I didn't have a choice, Ryan. Briggs, he has people everywhere. He said he'd kill my sister if I didn't help him." His voice cracked. "I thought it was just politics, money changing hands, but it's worse than that. You don't know how deep this goes." Ryan stepped closer, but his instincts screamed caution. "Then help me stop it. Tell me everything." Jack's breath came fast and shallow. "I was supposed to destroy the files from North Star, erase the payment records, but someone higher up, someone inside the department, was feeding them info about you." Ryan frowned. "Inside Pine Valley PD?" Jack nodded shakily. "They know every move you make, every call you send." Thomas tensed. "Who is it, Jack?" Jack looked up, terror flashing across his face. "You don't understand. They're in the..." The sound of a gunshot shattered the stillness. Jack's body jerked violently, then fell backward into the snow. The echo bounced between the cliffs, followed by silence. Ryan dove behind a rusted container, pulling Thomas down with him. "Sniper!" he hissed. Shadow barked sharply, pressing close to the ground. Ryan peered around the corner, scanning the ridge. The faint glint of metal reflected under the moonlight, a scope catching light for just a second. Another shot rang out, splintering the metal near Ryan's head. He ducked back, heart hammering. "Jack's hit bad," Thomas whispered. Ryan risked another glance. Jack lay sprawled in the snow, blood spreading beneath him. Slowly, painfully, Jack's hand twitched. His lips moved soundlessly, forming the words, "They're in the station," before his eyes went still. Ryan exhaled hard, fury boiling beneath the surface. Whoever was behind that trigger wasn't just silencing a loose end. They were cleaning house. He turned to Shadow. "Find them, boy." The German shepherd sniffed the air, then dashed toward a narrow trail behind the mine. Ryan followed at a crouch, his boots crunching softly in the snow. A few yards ahead, he found tire tracks, fresh, leading toward the tree line. He knelt, running his hand over the indentation. SUV, heavy. Probably the same crew Briggs used for the abduction. Thomas joined him, his breath visible in the freezing air. "So, what now?" Ryan stood, jaw tight. "We bring this to Doyle. Briggs has someone inside law enforcement feeding him intel. That's why every move we make gets traced." Thomas stared back toward Jack's still body, illuminated faintly by the moon. He tried to make it right. Ryan nodded, and died for it. They retrieved Jack's ID badge and a folded note from his coat pocket, smudged and wet with blood. Only 2 words were legible. Locker 42. Ryan tucked it into his vest. "We find out what that means." As they left the site, the faint crunch of snow made Shadow turn sharply. Ryan aimed his flashlight, but there was nothing, only the faint sway of pine branches in the wind. Still, he knew they weren't alone. The sniper had already moved on, maybe watching them even now from another ridge. By the time they reached the truck, sirens could be heard in the distance. FBI response units, too late as always. Ryan helped Thomas inside, then gave one last look toward the mine. Smoke from the rifle's muzzle drifted faintly through the cold air, curling upward into the night sky like a ghost. Shadow rested his head on Ryan's knee during the ride back, his breathing steady but alert. Ryan's thoughts churned. Jack's dying words, the leak inside the department, the note in his pocket. Every piece pointed to something larger, darker, and far closer than he'd realized. Back in town, Grace was pacing inside the safe house, her phone clutched tightly. Sarah stood near the window, scanning the street below. When Ryan entered, both women turned instantly. "Dead." "You find him?" Grace asked, hope flickering in her tired eyes. Ryan shook his head. "He's gone. Sniper got to him first." Sarah's expression hardened. "Then Briggs knows you're close." "He knows everything," Ryan said grimly. "Jack said they're inside the station. Someone's been feeding them intel from the start." Grace's grip on the phone tightened. Then no one in Pine Valley PD can be trusted. Outside, headlights flashed briefly across the window, then turned away. Sarah closed the blinds. "We'll have to move the kids. Tonight." Grace nodded, already reaching for Ellie's coat. "Where?" "FBI headquarters," Ryan said. "Doyle's sending a team." Sarah hesitated. "And you?" "I'm going back to the station. If there's a leak, I'll find it." She met his gaze, worry shadowing her face. "Ryan, if they're in the department, you're walking straight into their hands." He holstered his weapon, voice steady. "Then I'll make sure they regret it." Shadow stood beside him, tail low but unwavering. As Ryan stepped out into the freezing night, the snow began to fall harder, coating the dark streets of Pine Valley like a shroud. Somewhere in the distance, a lone church bell rang, 12 slow chimes marking midnight. It was the sound of an ending, or maybe the beginning of something worse. The Pine Valley Police Department was quiet that morning, too quiet. Snow still clung to the windowsills, melting slowly under the pale dawn light. Ryan parked his truck across the street, watching the front doors through the windshield. Inside, shadows moved. Familiar shapes, faces he used to trust. He'd been part of that department for nearly 10 years. He knew its creaks, its codes, its people. But now, it felt like enemy ground. Shadow shifted in the passenger seat, letting out a low growl. Ryan glanced at him, rubbing behind his ears. "Yeah, I feel it too," he muttered. "Let's end this." He stepped out, adjusting his navy winter jacket, badge clipped neatly over his chest. The cold bit at his face as he crossed the icy lot and pushed open the station doors. Inside, the air was heavy with tension. Conversations died mid-sentence. Officers looked up from their desks, eyes tracking him with suspicion and unease. At the far end of the hall stood Sheriff Victor Lane, a man in his mid-50s, tall, broad-shouldered, with neatly combed gray hair and a trimmed mustache. His uniform was immaculate, boots polished to a shine, as if image could still erase guilt. Lane had been Ryan's superior since his first day in Pine Valley, a man once respected for his discipline and fairness, but now his sharp blue eyes carried something colder, calculation. "Ryan," Lane said with forced calm, "didn't expect to see you here. You're still suspended, last I checked." Ryan met his gaze. "You and I need to talk." The sheriff hesitated, then gestured toward his office. "Fine. 5 minutes." As they walked down the corridor, Ryan's mind replayed Jack Harmon's dying words. They're in the station. The confirmation sat heavy in his gut. Once inside, Lane shut the door and motioned toward a chair. "This better be quick. I have a meeting with the deputy mayor in half an hour." "I know," Ryan said, his voice steady. "That's why I'm here." Lane leaned back in his chair, folding his arms. "You've been busy, running around with civilians, stirring up rumors, breaking protocol. You're lucky I haven't had you arrested yet." Ryan ignored the jab. "You've been covering for Briggs. North Star, the false contracts, the money funneling through your accounts, it's all connected." The older man's expression hardened. "Careful what you're accusing me of, son. You start slinging dirt like that, you better have proof." Ryan stepped closer, lowering his voice. "I do." For a heartbeat, neither man moved. Then, a faint scratching sound drew Ryan's attention. Shadow, who had slipped quietly into the office behind him, was pawing at a wooden cabinet near the wall. Lane frowned. "Get your dog out of here." But Ryan crouched beside the cabinet. He noticed a small latch near the base, half hidden behind a stack of folders. He pulled it open and froze. Inside, wrapped in plastic, sleeves, were ledgers, bank statements, and envelopes filled with cash, each labeled with project codes matching the North Star accounts. At the bottom sat a hard drive marked Municipal Bridge Private. Ryan straightened, eyes locked on Lane. "You want to explain this?" Lane's face turned ashen. "You have no right to search my office." "Shadow found it," Ryan said coldly. "Guess he smells corruption as easily as fear." The sheriff's composure cracked. "You don't understand what you're getting into," he snapped. "Briggs runs this town. Half the council's in his pocket. You think one little dog and a has-been Marine can change that?" Ryan leaned over the desk, voice low and sharp. "No, but the truth can." He placed a small recording device on the table, one that had been running since he entered the room. Lane's eyes widened as a realization dawned. "You're recording this?" Ryan didn't answer. He only said, "Tell me everything." Minutes passed. Lane's bravado faltered. He slumped in his chair, the weight of years of deceit pressing down. "It started with campaign money," he muttered. "Then construction contracts, favors, threats. Briggs had us all by the throat. If we didn't play along, we disappeared." "Jack Harmon disappeared," Ryan said quietly. Lane's eyes flickered. "Jack was sloppy. He took his cut and talked too much." "And you signed off on it." The sheriff's silence was answer enough. Ryan ended the recording, pocketed the device, and stepped back. "You just confessed to obstruction, racketeering, and conspiracy. You'll spend the rest of your life behind bars." Before Lane could move, the office door opened. 2 FBI agents stepped inside. One of them, Agent Marissa Doyle, her expression unreadable. "We got your message, Callahan," she said. "We'll take it from here." Lane's jaw tightened. "You set me up," he growled. Ryan met his glare. "No, you set yourself up years ago." The agents cuffed him without a word. As they led him past the stunned officers outside, whispers filled the room. For the first time, Ryan saw something shift. Fear turning into disbelief. Disbelief turning into hope. By noon, the news had spread across Pine Valley. Every major outlet was broadcasting the same headline: Sheriff Victor Lane arrested in corruption scandal. Deputy Mayor under federal investigation. At the FBI base, Thomas and Sarah worked tirelessly, coordinating press coverage and confirming evidence. Grace sat beside her children, finally allowing herself a breath of relief. In the corner, Noah stood proudly beside a new piece of art, a hand-drawn picture of Shadow pulling Ellie from the fire. He'd colored the dog's eyes bright amber and written beneath it, "The hero of Pine Valley." Sarah noticed and smiled softly. "That's beautiful, Noah. Mind if we hang it at the hospital?" He nodded eagerly. "I want people to know he's the reason we're all safe." Within hours, the photo of the drawing spread online. Locals shared it on social media with the caption, "Faith still lives here." Messages poured in, prayers, thanks, and stories of hope. For a town that had lived in fear and silence for too long, the simple image of a dog and 2 children had become a symbol of light. That evening, Ryan stood outside the FBI field office watching the sunset bleed across the snowy horizon. The sky glowed orange and gold, reflecting on the frozen creek below. Shadow sat beside him, tail sweeping softly through the snow. Thomas joined him, holding 2 mugs of coffee. "Never thought I'd see the day," he said. "Neither did I," Ryan replied. "But this isn't over yet. Briggs won't go down without a fight." Thomas nodded. "No, but now the whole world's watching." Ryan glanced down at Shadow. "And they've got a new hero to believe in." The dog huffed softly, as if modestly denying the praise, then rested his head against Ryan's leg. For the first time in months, Ryan let himself smile. Tired, quiet, but real. In the distance, church bells began to ring again, no longer sounding like a warning, but a promise of something reborn. The wind screamed through the mountains, carrying snow that cut like shards of glass. The convoy's headlights carved pale tunnels through the storm, flickering against jagged rocks and frozen pines. Ryan gripped the steering wheel, his jaw tight, eyes fixed on the faint red taillights in the distance, the fleeing vehicle of Deputy Mayor Leonard Briggs. FBI vehicles followed close behind, their sirens drowned beneath the roar of the wind. Shadow sat in the passenger seat, alert, muscles coiled, his breath fogging the cold air. The dog's sharp gaze never left the white trail ahead. "Suspects heading north toward the Ridge Pass," Agent Marissa Doyle's voice crackled over the radio. "All units converge from the east. Do not engage until backup is confirmed." Ryan pressed the radio. "Negative, he's not waiting for us. We cut him off before the ridge." Static answered, then silence. Thomas's voice came through next, calm but strained. "We're tracking his signal from Grace's live stream feed. He's panicking, his driver's pushing the engine too hard." Ryan exhaled through gritted teeth. "Then we'll make sure it's his last mistake." The snow thickened, blurring the world into gray. The road ahead twisted sharply between cliffs, a single-lane pass with no guardrail. Ryan could barely see 10 yards ahead. His headlights flashed against something moving, a dark SUV fishtailing wildly. Briggs's vehicle. "Shadow, hold on," Ryan muttered. He floored the gas. The engine roared as his truck surged forward, the tires fighting for traction. The suspect's SUV swerved, one wheel slipping off the edge before catching again. Inside, through the blizzard haze, Ryan caught a glimpse of Briggs, mid-50s, balding, with a fur-lined coat and panic in his eyes. His driver, a younger man in black tactical gear, shouted something Ryan couldn't hear. Then the gunfire started. Bullets punched through the air, clanging off metal and stone. Ryan swerved, glass shattering as a round tore through the side mirror. Shadow barked fiercely, crouching low, hackles raised. Ryan leaned out just enough to return fire, 3 quick shots aimed at the rear tires. The SUV jerked violently. One tire blew, the car spinning out of control before skidding sideways across the icy road. It slammed into a snowbank, nose first, the back wheels lifting off the ground before crashing down. Steam hissed from the hood. Ryan stopped his truck a few yards back. The silence that followed was almost eerie, the storm muting everything but the soft crackle of ice and the faint hiss of leaking coolant. He drew his gun and stepped out into the cold. Snow crunched beneath his boots. "Leonard Briggs!" Ryan shouted, voice carrying through the wind. "You're surrounded. Step out of the vehicle with your hands up." The driver stumbled out first, coughing, one arm bleeding. He dropped his weapon and fell to his knees. Then Briggs emerged, still clutching a handgun, his face twisted in rage and desperation. "You don't understand," he screamed. "You think you've won, but this town belongs to me. I built it. I made every one of you." Ryan advanced slowly, weapon trained on him. "You built it on blood and lies. That's over now." Briggs's breath came in sharp, frantic bursts. "No, not like this. I won't be paraded around like some criminal." His finger tightened on the trigger. "Don't," Ryan warned. But Briggs fired. Time slowed. The flash of the muzzle cut through the snow like lightning. The bullet hissed through the air, until a blur of black and tan leapt between them. Shadow slammed into Briggs's arm just as the shot went off. The bullet grazed Ryan's shoulder, tearing fabric and flesh, sending a hot streak of pain down his side. He dropped to one knee, gun still raised. Briggs fell backward, his weapon skidding across the ice. Shadow growled low, pinning him by the wrist, teeth bared inches from his throat. Ryan stood, blood seeping through his sleeve, but his voice was steady. "Enough, boy." Shadow released his grip and backed away, still glaring. Ryan limped forward, kicked the gun aside, and cuffed Briggs with practiced precision. The deputy mayor's chest heaved, his face pale under the flickering red-blue light of approaching FBI vehicles. Ryan looked him dead in the eye. "Justice doesn't need to hide in the dark." Briggs's eyes darted wildly, searching for escape where none existed. Then, defeated, he slumped to his knees as the first rays of dawn broke over the ridge. The storm had begun to fade, painting the snow in soft gold. Agent Doyle arrived moments later, flanked by her team. "Callahan," she said, scanning the scene. "You okay?" Ryan nodded, pressing a hand to his bleeding shoulder. "It's just a graze." Doyle glanced at Briggs, now silent and trembling. "You got him." "No," Ryan said quietly. "Shadow did." The German shepherd stood proudly beside him, fur speckled with snow, chest rising and falling with heavy breaths. Doyle smiled faintly. "Then let's get your partner a medal." Meanwhile, down in Pine Valley, Grace watched the live stream through trembling hands. Thomas filmed the feed directly from Ryan's body cam, broadcasting it through Sarah's verified account. Thousands watched in real time as the deputy mayor was arrested at sunrise, the light of justice replacing the long shadow he'd cast over the town. Noah and Ellie clung to their mother, tears in their eyes, not of fear, but relief. "He did it, Mom," Noah whispered. "Uncle Ryan caught him." Grace nodded, voice breaking. "No, honey, they all did. Ryan, Shadow, and your father, too." By midday, the footage had spread nationwide. News anchors replayed the clip over and over, a wounded officer standing firm, a loyal dog protecting him, and a corrupt official finally brought to his knees. The image became a symbol of courage, the fire of truth breaking through the frost of fear. Hours later, back in Pine Valley, Ryan sat on the tailgate of an ambulance, shoulder bandaged. Shadow rested beside him, one paw draped over his boot. Snowflakes landed softly on the dog's muzzle, melting into tiny drops that glistened in the early sunlight. Thomas approached, holding a thermos of coffee. "You're going to be on every news channel by sunset." he said with a tired smile. Ryan chuckled weakly. Yeah, maybe they'll spell my name right this time. Thomas looked out toward the distant valley. You know what Grace did? Ryan raised a brow. What? She streamed the arrest live. Whole town saw it. People are outside City Hall right now cheering your name. And shadows. Ryan shook his head. It's not about names. It's about finally getting our town back. Shadow lifted his head at the sound of his name, tail thumping once against the snow. Ryan scratched behind his ears. You did good, partner. As the sun climbed higher, melting the frost on the trees, Ryan watched light spill across the mountains, a light he hadn't seen in Pine Valley for a long, long time. 3 months had passed since the morning when justice finally broke through the frost that had gripped Pine Valley. The mountains that once hid corruption now glistened with the soft warmth of early spring. Snow melted into streams that whispered through the valley floor, carrying away the last remnants of winter's darkness. The town had changed. Its people walked with lighter steps, its air no longer thick with fear. Storefronts once boarded up were alive again with laughter, the smell of coffee and fresh bread drifting through Main Street. Banners fluttered from lampposts. Pine Valley, home of courage and hope. Ryan Callahan stood on the steps of the restored City Hall, straightening the collar of his formal sheriff's uniform. The golden badge over his chest gleamed beneath the morning light. His left shoulder still bore a faint scar from that final night on the ridge, but he carried it with quiet pride. Beside him sat Shadow, wearing a new leather harness polished to a shine, a golden canine medal hanging proudly around his neck. The dog's fur had grown thick again, his eyes calm yet alert, as if he knew the ceremony was about him as much as anyone else. Thomas and Grace Carter stood near the front of the gathering, hands clasped tightly. Grace wore a simple navy dress, her auburn hair lifted gently by the spring breeze. Thomas looked healthier now, a small scar still visible near his temple, a reminder of the cave where their nightmare began. Both of them looked toward Ryan and Shadow with gratitude that words could never fully express. Their children, Noah and Ellie, waved small flags with the Pine Valley crest printed on them. The boys' cheeks were red from excitement. Ellie wore a white wool hat that kept sliding down over her eyes, making the crowd laugh softly each time she pushed it back up. The square was packed with people. Reporters from Denver and even Chicago stood among locals, cameras ready, microphones trembling slightly in the chill. Above them hung a banner, Community Recognition Ceremony, for those who stood for truth. Mayor Evelyn Carter, no relation to Thomas, stepped onto the podium. She was in her 60s, with silver hair pinned into a bun and a voice both warm and commanding. Today, she began, her words carrying through the crisp air, we stand in the light of a new dawn. Pine Valley has weathered storms, faced corruption, and nearly lost its soul. But thanks to courage, quiet, steadfast, and unyielding, we stand free again. Applause rippled through the crowd. Please welcome Officer Ryan Callahan and K9 Shadow, the mayor announced. Ryan stepped forward, Shadow walking beside him in perfect sync. The applause swelled into cheers. Grace felt tears prick her eyes as Ellie tugged her sleeve. "Mommy, that's our hero," the little girl whispered. Ryan saluted, then leaned toward the microphone. His voice was steady but humble. "Thank you, Mayor. But today isn't about me. It's about everyone who refused to stay silent when it mattered most." He looked out over the crowd, catching glimpses of familiar faces. Sarah Green, the journalist who had risked her career to publish the truth. Agent Doyle, standing stoic in her dark suit near the front, and countless townspeople who once hid in fear but now stood proudly together. "When I first came to this town," Ryan continued, "I thought duty was about rules and orders, but I learned that real courage doesn't always come with a badge. Sometimes it comes from a family who never gave up searching. Sometimes it comes from a journalist who dared to speak when silence was safer. And sometimes," he looked down at Shadow, who lifted his head, ears perked, "it comes from a partner who doesn't need words to remind you what loyalty means." The crowd grew quiet. Ryan's next words were soft but carried weight. Not every hero carries a gun. Some just carry a faithful heart. Thunderous applause broke out. Grace pressed her hand to her chest, and even Thomas wiped at his eyes. Then, Mayor Carter stepped forward again, holding a small velvet box. For extraordinary bravery and service in the face of danger, Pine Valley proudly awards the Medal of Honor to Officer Ryan Callahan and the Gold Canine Medal of Valor to Shadow. As she placed the medal around Shadow's neck, the dog sat perfectly still, tail thumping once against the stage. The crowd erupted in cheers, children waving flags, cameras flashing. For a brief moment, time seemed to freeze, a town reborn under sunlight and hope. Later, as the ceremony ended, Grace and Thomas joined Ryan on the steps. "You should have seen the live broadcast," Grace said, smiling. "Thousands were watching. Pine Valley's story is spreading farther than we ever imagined." Ryan nodded modestly. "Maybe it'll remind people that truth's still worth fighting for." Thomas handed him a folded newspaper. The headline read, "The Heroes Who Melted the Ice, Pine Valley's Redemption." Beneath it was a photo of Ryan, Shadow, and the Carter family standing together. Ryan looked at it for a long moment before laughing softly. "Shadow looks better than me in that picture." Thomas chuckled. "That's because he doesn't have to shave every morning." As they spoke, Noah ran up, holding a sheet of paper. "Uncle Ryan, look what I wrote." It was his school assignment, My Hero. His handwriting was messy but bold. Ryan crouched to read it. "The night we knocked on his door, it was snowing hard. My sister was sick, but he opened it anyway. He didn't just save us, he saved our town, because sometimes one man and one dog can change everything." Ryan's throat tightened. He handed the paper back, ruffling the boy's hair. "That's a good story, kiddo. You keep writing, all right?" Noah nodded proudly. "I already read it at school. Everyone stood up and clapped." Ryan looked toward Grace. "You didn't tell me that." Grace smiled gently. "I wanted you to hear it from him." Ellie tugged at Ryan's sleeve. "Uncle Ryan, are you and Shadow coming to dinner?" He glanced down at the dog. "What do you say, partner?" Shadow gave a low bark of agreement. Grace laughed. "That's a yes." As the Carter family walked ahead, Ryan lingered for a moment on the steps. The sun was dipping low, painting the valley in amber light. The snow was nearly gone, the river alive again with the sound of renewal. He looked down at Shadow. "We did good, didn't we?" The dog's tail swayed lazily, eyes reflecting the warm sky. Ryan exhaled, letting the peace of the moment wash over him. Pine Valley had finally come back to life, not through power or politics, but through faith, truth, and the unbreakable bond between man and dog. And somewhere beyond the hills, the bells of the old church began to ring once more, not as a warning, but as a song of homecoming. In the quiet town of Pine Valley, one loyal heart changed everything. Shadow wasn't just a dog, he was a miracle wrapped in fur, sent to remind everyone that courage doesn't always roar, and faith doesn't always speak in words. When the world turned cold and corrupt, it was his loyalty that warmed hearts, his instinct that revealed truth, and his silent love that guided broken souls back to hope. Sometimes, God doesn't send angels with wings. He sends them with paws. Through Shadow, we see how divine love works quietly in everyday life, protecting, healing, and reminding us that goodness never truly dies. In our own lives, we might not face snowstorms or corruption, but we all face moments when darkness whispers that it's easier to give up. In those moments, remember Shadow's lesson. Stand firm, love fiercely, and keep faith even when you cannot see the way ahead. Because miracles don't always come from heaven, they walk beside us every day. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs a reminder that loyalty and faith can still save the world. Leave a comment, tell us where you're watching from, and type Amen to thank God for the unseen guardians who walk beside us. May the Lord bless you and your loved ones with courage, compassion, and the quiet strength to keep your fire burning through every storm. And don't forget, subscribe for more stories that remind us how faith, love, and one loyal heart can still change everything.